Should, yes, we're live. Just give me 1 minute. Hello, everyone. Let me just check if all of this is working fine, and then we can get started. And we can wait a couple minutes for our viewers to join as well. Yeah.
Sounds good. Welcome, everybody.
So, Andrew, where are you based out of?
I am in Brisbane, Australia. So midway up the East Coast.
Nice. Okay. How's the weather there?
I find it unbearably muggy, but I've lived here my entire life. I was born here, and I'm still not acclimatized. So everyone else thinks that it's mildly warm, and I think it's oppressive. So
yeah, I think it's the same for me. The place where I am brought up, it's like extremely hot. It goes up to like 48 degrees in summers, and I still am not like able to, stay here. I don't like this at all.
No, I like the cold. My wife and kids like the heat. So they like summer. I like winter. I keep saying we need a house like in Tasmania or something like that during the summer, and my wife just shoots me down every time. So
yeah, I get it.
yes, I say we have both.
Yeah. Cool. I think we can get started.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. We'll just do a quick round of introduction first. So hi everyone. I'm Tanvi. I'm a product marketer at Factors AI. I've been in the B2B SaaS space for over 4 years now and into product marketing for 2 years. So this topic where we discuss about all sorts of things related to product positioning at different stages of a SaaS company's growth, and how do you adapt messaging, recognizing market dynamics, etc. This is all very sort of personally interesting for me. Yeah, and Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, look, thank you. Great to be here. I'm Andrew Hatfield. I'm CEO and founder of Deepstar Strategic. As we discussed, I'm based in Brisbane. We focus on B2B SaaS. We're a go-to-market agency. Obviously, a lot of what we do is underpinned by product marketing. What else? I suppose in a snapshot, I've spent 28 years working in the tech industry. I started in software development, moved into software architecture, then into pre-sales and sales. Did really well. Then I really wanted to be involved in building something, and so I thought product management was the answer. I was told that I'd be better in product marketing, and here we are. But like all of that has given me this, clear insight that predictable, sustainable, and growth is possible in B2B SaaS. Like we're growing up from being a young kid to being a teenager now, but it does require having a different approach than the playbooks that you see a lot of people talking about. Let's be fair. What we've been using from 2012 all the way through to 2020 just doesn't cut it in today's market. What I do find is a lot of customers and companies they're really hesitant to do something different, right? They don't want to break away from the pack. The risk is too high, and it's much safer just staying with what they think is tried and true. But what I consistently see, whether it's with people that I work with, or I see, I read financial reports, or I see other, people working in this space, that GTM efficiency is it's cratering, right? Like it is not good, and it's only getting worse, right? So when we look at the like what we call GTM efficiency. It's like the measure of how much revenue we bring in for every dollar we spend, right? And it's quite common for that to be at 200%, 400%, or even more. So it means that, you know, for every dollar we spend, for every $4, let me say that again. For every dollar that we bring in revenue, it's costing us $4 to acquire it, right? And that's just, it's not sustainable, right? So your CAC payback period is blown out. You will run out of cash long before you can get that under control, right? So this is where, you know, and it's probably because of my background in that tech space that, you know, that scientific, you know, rigor and the way we think about things, bringing science and manufacturing to go-to-market and strategy, you know, building distinct go-to-market motions, aligning the entire business. And I think of go-to-market is not just sales and marketing, but it starts with product. Obviously, there's sales and marketing, but then there's customer success, there's professional services. All of that is go-to-market, and it's led by the business, not by the individual teams, right? And that way, we're able to think about turning growth into, you know, it's commonly referred to at the minute as a revenue factory, whatever you want to call it, lean manufacturing, you know, supply chain, etc. But the outcome is that we can, you know, deliver repeatable, efficient, scalable results. And that's what we specialize in at DeepStar, right? So aligning teams so that their go-to-market strategy, it runs like a demand engine, a well-oiled machine. How can we make clear go-to-market motions, reduce CAC, increase win rates, and then, you know, just really drive qualified pipeline in a way that's measurable on the right metrics and repeatable, right? Because there's no point in doing something that once it's running, you need certain people to do. Like, you need a process that works. It's like a machine, right? And you know, we don't just focus on strategy. Like, strategy is important. Don't get me wrong. The wrong strategy, you're in a world of hurt. But only having strategy, I see a lot of consultants or even internal in-house people that everyone wants to focus on strategy. That's great, but execution will beat strategy every single time. And we see this a lot, right? And not just in tech, right? So if we can put, you know, our buyer at the center, what their problem is, the impact of our solution, and we call this buyer-led growth. That's the approach that we take. That's the foundation, and it really allows us to drive, you know, real tangible results and get quick wins now, so that we can fund bigger experiments, so that then we can continue to build this and iterate. And then we can start to innovate, right? So it's that kind of two-step. And when I'm not doing that, I really like, you know, some nice whiskey. We were talking earlier about snowboarding, and I love cooking over fire, so barbecue. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Wow, amazing. And honestly, yeah, true. I mean, in this AI sort of a world, it's become so difficult to stand out and do the right things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's get started then.
Sure.
Cool. So my first question, sort of for you, is basically, see, I have been in organizations where one was very early stage SMB focused organization, and the other was early stage but enterprise focused organization, right? And what I saw was that the messaging there, or rather say the things we talked about, right, are very, very different. At SMBs, it's more like, you know, problem solution oriented, whereas in enterprises, it's more like on the lines of scalability, reliability, security, and all of these things, right? So what do you think, how does, you know, positioning sort of change in early stage companies and enterprises?
Yeah, look, fairly common question. And I think we can expand this. It's not just early stage and enterprise. There's growth stage in there as well. While focus is critical for every company, regardless of size or stage, there is a difference in how those extremes approach positioning, right? For early stage, the crucial factor really is recognizing that they can't be everything to everyone. That is probably the biggest trap that new companies or new founders and inexperienced leaders fall into, that they see this like big TAM that they want to go after. Because the reality is that you've got limited budgets, you've got a small, if any, brand presence, you've got very limited market reach. And so you really need to focus tightly on a very specific audience segment. And so that means, identifying and targeting those that are in market now and are ready to buy. So you need to find the communities that your buyers are in, understand your competitive landscape, and identify and then start tracking, those intent signals that indicate some form of readiness to purchase. The things that I see from an early stage company, and I can dive into these, but you absolutely need to have a clear differentiator, and that can take different forms, right? Underserved segments, specialized niche disruption, or you could take a horizontal large scale disruption approach. On an enterprise perspective, that comes with its own challenges as well, right? Enterprise companies, they often suffer from an inability to move quickly, right? So they can't change direction, they can't respond to emerging market trends. So you need to balance innovation and with feasibility, especially as they're looking at bringing new products to market or expanding them. They have to look at how that aligns with their brand promise, because any new positioning or product launch, it has to align with the core promise that they've made, or that permission that they have in the market, right? What is it that they are known for, right? So they need to be consistent, maintain trust. And then especially for companies that are established and they're doing something new that is similar, they have to be aware of the risk of cannibalization. Now, some companies do this deliberately. Like you look at from hardware to software or from on-premises to cloud, right? That is deliberate because those are reducing markets, the hardware and the on-premises, and they want to, take their offering and, go through that transformation. But sometimes they don't want to, and you don't want to go and start competing with yourself, right? If that's not your intent. So regardless of, early stage growth enterprise, the big key is to focus on who your product is really for, how it stands apart from the alternatives, and how it aligns with the evolving needs of the market, right? And I can dive a bit deeper into some of that.
Yeah, like right as you said, right, evolving needs of the market, and a lot depends on the maturity of the market as well. Like in one of my earlier companies, we were tasked with category creation. It was so damn difficult, and the market was just emerging. People didn't understand a lot. Honestly, people even know about that category, and it was a very different ball game altogether. So what do you think about this? How does market maturity and buyer sophistication shape your GTM strategies?
Well, it obviously plays a significant role in both the go-to-market strategy and your product messaging, right? And it has to evolve. Like, it can't stay stagnant. But regardless of the stage of the market, you always need to highlight your value differentiator. But the way that you communicate that will change depending on both the market maturity and the buyer sophistication. So I like to think of it in terms of, you've got early stage and new categories. So in newer categories, you have to educate the market, right? You have to explain why that category matters, what problem it solves, how it's different from what buyers already know. And so often the messaging has to be more solution oriented, focusing on the outcome and the overarching value prop. It's about creating demand by positioning that as something that buyers didn't realize they needed until now. So you're really focusing on kind of that problem unaware, maybe problem aware stage, and you're doing, I like to think of it as the disturb. A great example is NoSQL databases. You think of MongoDB, had to educate the market on why the traditional relational database didn't work for certain solutions, or why scale out storage was the answer for large unstructured data, right? So you're focusing more on that broad solution and the benefits of adopting a new approach. Narrative design is really good for that, right? The whole old world versus new world. Then you think about, you want to scale a company in an established category, right? So as categories, they mature and the market starts to understand the problem and the solution, the messaging now needs to shift into this competitive differentiation. It's no longer just about why the solution matters, but why your product is better than the alternatives, or different, right? And you have to be careful with better versus different. There are differences, but it's crucial to highlight specific advantages that you have over known competitors. And that could be, especially at the enterprise space, as you touched on, It could be better integration, lower total cost of ownership, faster time to value. You think about this in the revenue intelligence space. Chorus, since been acquired by, I think, Zoom Info, but they differentiated themselves from Gong, who were the category leader, by focusing on like deep CRM integration and enhanced call coaching, right? So that's how they drew a comparison. And then when you
Yeah.
think about, sorry.
Sorry. I think, one thing that I also saw, like early stage companies, we were trying to market to enterprises, and the one sort of differentiation we thought is that we were very sort of flexible in terms of what we offered. We could, in addition to providing a software, we also provided like a service angle to it, so that becomes our differentiation. It's easier for enterprises to, um, work with us basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt.
enterprise vendors and enterprise customers love services. Problem is it doesn't scale and it's not renewable, it doesn't repeat. But it does offer that level of comfort, especially at that scale. It is unlikely that anything out of the box will work perfectly for you. And that's why there's this big focus on integration. Ease of use isn't as high, but then they start thinking about security and compliance, data sovereignty, single sign-on, right? Training requirements for their existing staff. Then, especially at the enterprise space, regardless of category, is now you've got bigger, more mature procurement teams and vendor management. Like, do I want to even bring on a whole new vendor? Right. So there's all those sort of things. All right. So it really, it's a different game, right? And then when you're thinking about the approach, it's the messaging typically has to be far more specific and feature oriented. Not that you're not talking about value and outcomes, but now you're saying, look, I do have these 15 things and these actually matter, whereas, the incumbent or the alternative only has 10, right? These extra 5 things, they make a difference for you because, right? And, that could be feature comparisons, performance, ROI, right? You take project management software like Asana or Monday, they focus on specific use cases, but then they highlight all the unique workflow capabilities, the long list of integrations. And so they really focus on emphasizing their feature differences, as well as things like performance benchmarks and customer success stories, so that they can kind of have respond to a more sophisticated buyer process.
Yeah. So since we are on market maturity, right, there are, there are always trends coming and going, and markets will also keep evolving, right? So how do you think companies should, approach aligning their GTM strategy with these evolving market trends and shifting, changing customer needs?
Yeah, look, one of the biggest challenges, and this is spoken about a lot, but there's more competition than ever before now. The barrier to entry is almost non-existent, right? I can, and this is even before we had AI writing code for us and doing design and websites and all that, right? That's just made it even, worse, right? But I can get talent from anywhere in the world. I don't need a lot of capital, right? So I look at the CRM category. There's over 230 different CRMs, but most people couldn't name more than 5, right? So the 3 things, right, are have to adapt your messaging over time, but avoid being overly broad, right? We definitely see as brands grow and categories mature, there is that tendency to broaden messaging, right? You see Apple or HubSpot do this, right? So their top line messaging is often reduced to like 1 or 2 words, but that works because they've got really strong brand equity and market presence. Doesn't work for early stage companies, sorry. From an early stage, right, they still need to be very clear and specific, focusing on that core problem and the unique value of their solution. And so as they grow, they tend to become more aspirational, but the trick is to make sure you never lose track of that or lose sight of what makes their product distinctive. A framework that a thought process is really more the way I look at this, a structured approach. I always look at how can I have regular market and competitor analysis. So understand, like, what are the competitors doing? How are my customers, whether they're ideal buyers, customers, former customers, how are they solving this problem? Like, are they still using the same alternatives they were a year ago? What trends are emerging? Right? Like, I look at work from home, massive disruptor, right? And so how those buyer needs are shifting. Then, having this, kind of fanatical focus on voice of the customer, how can we instill customer feedback loops in everything that we do? So ongoing feedback from customers about identifying gaps in messaging, in product, identifying new pain points, what their new needs are, how that's changing, right? And that could be as simple as there's now been, because there's so much competition, it's so much easier to enter the market, there's a whole new product that you now need to integrate with. It could be as simple as that. It could be all the way to, well, we think about work from home. Instead of everyone being in one office, we're now distributed over 10,000 mini offices, right? Underpinning all of that is knowing your numbers, right? So undertaking a quarterly go-to-market audit, so assessing that positioning, the messaging, and any campaigns, or campaigns is the wrong way to think about that. Rather than campaigns, think about programs, right? And making sure that they are still effective and efficient, right? And that they align with all of these things that you're learning. And then I really find a lot of value in testing, right? So message testing platforms, Winter is great for that. There's Askable. There's a bunch of others. You can do it yourself. You can go, like, one startup I worked for, they went and hired a political research consultancy, because the skills are largely the same, right? It's just talk to people and ask questions. So use qualitative and quantitative feedback. One of my favorite is max diff, right? So much more useful than ranked choice. Free tip there. But yeah, going and finding out like what's working, especially from a messaging perspective. And there's so many ways to test that. Obviously, there's your homepage, but there's big investments and kind of people with a lot of buy-in there. But you can go and test that sort of stuff on a landing page. You can test it on a social conversation. Excuse me. Test it in comments that you make in response to others. You can test it on sales calls. There's lots of ways to test messaging. It doesn't need to be like big R research. And then staying data-driven and literate at scale, right? And what I mean by that is obviously that's important at any stage, but when you get to large scale, as companies grow, small drifts can really become big misses if you're misaligned, right? Like that 1 degree here is miles apart later on. So having a high degree of data literacy so that you can catch problems early on and see those signs of misalignment. So whether that's a drop in win rate or an increase in CAC or a lower NRR, and having a real-time dashboard. Like there's a couple of key metrics that you always want to look at, but then each business is just slightly different. And the closer that you can have your dashboards reflect your market, your customer, and your product, and having that tight integration in your motion as well, the more effective that you're going to be. And just knowing what those numbers mean, like what's the difference between net new ARR and new ARR? What's the difference between go-to-market efficiency and the CAC ratio? Right, those sort of things. So, being data literate is super important.
These are great points, Andrew. But your point of as companies grow, there's a tendency to broaden messaging and capture everything that a company does in just a few words. That just I just want to build up on that part. So, like for example, take Slack. Slack in its early days called itself like a one messaging platform for teams, and now as it has grown, it has now started calling itself an AI work management and productivity tool, right? So in that sense, how do you think positioning evolves when a company evolves, like right from early stage to growth stage to enterprises? How should that evolve, and what should marketers take care of while doing this?
Yeah, like you look at Slack, the thing that really helped them grow is it's a great product.
Yeah.
Chat, effectively what they are is not new. We've had Wall, we've had IRC, we've had Talk, like Netcat, like that's not new. What they did was just make it consumable. Like going back to that idea about execution over strategy, right?
Yeah.
People think that it's a new category. It's not. It's just they did it so much better and differently, right? So, but to your point, they have both grown in their functionality, so scaled out, but they've also scaled up in terms of the market that they go after. So, they really started with the startups and early stage companies, tech companies. Now they are going after enterprise as well, like with Enterprise Grid and all of that. Now, obviously, they're owned by Salesforce. So they're getting a lot of that functionality baked in. So,
Yeah.
right. Yes, they are doing more. And so they're more than just like getting rid of the I can't remember, that they used to have a line about keeping track of communication, not getting lost in email, like something like that, like replace email, use Slack. And look, I live that. I like knowledge management, and instant message is not that. But email is just not conducive to being productive, right? The ability to just go and talk with someone like bang straight away. Again, chat, right? Not new. We've got that on our phones, SMS, Messenger, iMessages, etc. But then being able to go and link that to my other workflow tools, right? And that's kind of been that natural progression, that as the market and their user base has adopted more of the core functionality, right? The only way that they can continue to expand their market is to add extensions to the product, right? So not product line extension, but they've grown the capability, right? And that's why they've shifted from, ditch email, use Slack for chat, to now I can have whole workflows, right? So I can integrate it into 3 different applications. I don't need to leave Slack, right, for the majority of the tools when I've got those workflows set up. So from a positioning perspective, right, that they have to update that, right? They can't just stay in this ditch email, use chat. The challenge, though, is like you look at their homepage now. Yeah, I'll bring it up. Let's have a look. What does Slack say on the homepage? I'll do it in incognito, right? Where work happens. If I didn't know what Slack is, I wouldn't know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Where what work happens? What do you mean? Like it's an app? Am I a gardener? Right? Right. So the only reason that works is because the market already has a really good understanding that Slack has this list of capabilities, and so what they're doing is kind of adopting a storytelling approach without it being too blatant and obvious about an aspiration, right? Like it's speaking to us much more emotionally than it is functionally, right? If we think about the jobs to be done of emotional, functional, and social, right? So that's kind of the approach that they've taken, and we see this a lot, right? HubSpot is similar. If I look at HubSpot's now as well, grow better with HubSpot. Cool, I love HubSpot. It's great. I'm a HubSpot partner, but grow what, right? They can only get away with that because they've got this brand presence.
Definitely. Cool. I totally get your point. But right as you said, but Slack moved from one very sort of targeted um, messaging, which is like messaging app for teams.
Yeah.
But that has become and creating that brand presence and growing from that early stage, that has become very very difficult these days for early stage companies, mostly because there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of competition, and also the resources that early stage startups are operating with in these this time, it's very limited. So like, how do you think early stage startups should they can stand out with in a crowded market?
Yeah, look, before I go into detail, the number one thing that I have observed is true repeatedly is execution is more important than strategy, right? Yes, you need a great product. Yes, you need to have a strategy, But if you can't execute on it, it doesn't matter. It's all for naught. All right. That said, for early stage companies, it's super simple. You have to be laser focused. Focus on the smallest viable market. Right. There's always this a tendency to, I want to go after a big TAM. Right. No, focus on a specific, well-defined segment, the smallest group of buyers who will benefit the most from your solution. Right. As April Dunford says, right, that you're looking for those who care a lot about the one thing you do that no one else does. Right. Very simple. Right. You want to be laser focused on the impact of the problem. Right? A lot of people, they misconstrue like problem and solution. It's not the problem, right? It's the impact that the problem causes. And it's not your solution. It's the value that your solution delivers, right? A good way to think about this and kind of work through it is the 3 whys, right? That, okay, so it does X. All right, cool. That's important. Why, right? And until you can't answer that any further, and generally 3 is a good depth for that without it being a bit too academic. Being very clear about the value of your solution, kind of touched on that. Then you need to find your buyers. Where are they? What communities do they rely on? What people do they listen to? And then speak their language. You need to know them and their problem and their world better than they do, so that then, as you are executing on your go-to-market strategy, something that in particular for early stage companies that I've found works and it doesn't need a charismatic leader, right? I think this is the number one fear that startups have, is leveraging your founder brand. And if you don't have one, go and make one. Go and talk about your problem, right? Just be out there talking, evangelizing, asking questions, replying to comments. Like, this is what social is great at, whether it's LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, like Twitter, X, whatever channel it is that your buyers are in. It could be a Circle community, it could be a Slack community, right? Discord, whatever. Be there, talk to people, and be known to be that person that knows a lot. And on top of that, share what you've been learning and give away a lot of that knowledge and that value for free so that you can build trust, right? Your goal at the minute is to build an audience of people who know, like, and trust you, not to sell your product and solution, right? That will come as a result of all this other stuff. And again, that is not obvious, right? But it works.
Yeah, I think it's more of thinking about the long term sort of a game, rather than just looking at short term results, like how many leads, how many customers I'm getting. I understand, that's where early stage start. I mean, it's important as well, but from a marketing perspective, I think it's also important to build that trust and credibility, which might or
Absolutely.
might not give you those leads. I mean,
Yeah. But that said, I would just be very clear that what you just said is your paraphrasing of my answer, but
yeah,
you're focusing on those that have the problem now, right? There's no point building this massive audience and this great trust. Yes, you need to do that, but if it's for people that are going to buy in 2 years' time, right? What you're doing is looking for those that have the problem today, right?
understood. Yeah, great.
Low-hanging
Cool.
fruit.
Yes, low hanging fruit makes sense. Cool. Now I just want to shift focus to enterprise companies, and so like we know, right? HubSpot, for example, has a very good brand presence now. Everyone knows what HubSpot does, etc., etc. Now, if, for example, these enterprise companies want to reposition their well-known products, or let's say introduce new ones, what would be some of the challenges they should be aware of, and how do product marketers there, how can they navigate this thing?
Yeah, so 3 things spring to mind because I've worked for both enterprise and various stage startups. That enterprises have a lot of benefits, but
Yeah.
they also come with some challenges. So when you're doing product line extensions, so I'm adding a new product, you have to, or even if I'm adding new positioning to an existing product, you have to make sure that it still fits the brand perception, right? So it works best when there's a natural fit with what the brand is already well known for. So if you're synonymous with accounting software, but then you try and then you try and launch something in a completely different category like workforce management, you're going to create confusion, right? So buyers will struggle to understand the value of what you do because they don't have the context of your company in that new category, right? And so now there's no trust, right? So any new offering has to align with that brand permission. A great example of this, and I think it was Volvo, family cars, safe, really good, well-engineered vehicles. But then they went and made this luxury high-performance sports car that apparently was amazing. It won all these awards, but commercially was an absolute failure because it didn't fit the brand permission that the market had for them, right? And so that would have been far better off spinning it off into a different company or a subsidiary, right? So if you're doing something that's radically different, consider spinning it out, or just starting a new business with a new brand that is focused on that. You think about when Google went and did self-driving cars, right? Google's known, search, now it's data, advertising, but they went and spun that out as Waymo, completely different, right? A lot of people didn't necessarily or naturally associate Waymo with Google, and that was by design, right? So if you're doing something radically different, think about that. And kind of going back to an earlier point that you made about category creation and just choosing a category, we can do lots of stuff, but in the end, it's the market that determines what category we fit in, right? So I think a lot of people are either not aware of that or just ignore it. From a benefits perspective, right, enterprises definitely have significant advantages, right? They've got market share already, they've got share of voice, they've got reach, and they've got cash, right? So they are absolutely a big advantages. And this is why if I'm a startup and I'm thinking about what my positioning approach is, one of them is to directly attack the category leader. Generally, that's dumb because the category leader has reach, cash, market share, and share of voice, right? So that's why generally new entrants don't do that, right? But from an enterprise, that's a huge foundation and an advantage to leverage, right? So thinking about Slack, you compare, you think about Teams. Arguably, Slack is a far superior product, but Teams now has greater market share. And the reason for that is Microsoft has a massive customer base. They're loyal. They've got a massive partner network. They've got reach, and they've got they understand how businesses buy, like enterprises, and they aggressively leverage their ELA, right? So they used a lot of bundling and providing commercial benefits that if companies switch to Teams, they get a cost advantage, right? And so Teams, nowhere near as good or as functional as Slack, right? Or the user experience or anything like that. It's got more market share. So better doesn't win, right? So you have to be aware of that. And then you think about the real challenge, and I see this a lot. Like people always ask about, how can I go after multiple personas? All right. So there's two aspects to this. The first thing is don't go after a persona, go after a job and marry it with a segment, and then find the personas that have that job in that segment, right? And you'll find that there are similarities across different segments and those personas. So the persona is just the representation in each segment, not the thing you're actually after. But then you do need to start thinking about, as you move up market and you're selling to enterprises, about I need to separate my messaging. I've got end users, and so I might look at things like ease of use and productivity gains, workflow enhancements. I've got some form of like middle management, right? They're like a business buyer, so I might look at operational efficiency, integration capabilities, user adoption. But then there's that executive messaging, especially if I'm doing something that needs large-scale adoption for it to actually work inside the business, or there's a significant financial outlay. So there I'd look at, they care about ROI, internal rate of return, net present value, sociability, long-term strategic benefits, even things like ESG and energy scores, right? So you need to tailor the messaging to those different tiers, right? As well as the segments, right? This is something that just generally, I've got a product and that product might fit in multiple different markets. Same product, but I position it for, say, the North American enterprise accounting market might be completely different to the European mid-market workforce management, right? As kind of touching on an example earlier. So those segments are vastly different. So I'd have different go-to-markets for those, and that would mean I'd have different personas, different value, and different messaging, right? Even though I've got the one product, right? So that's how those things kind of fit together.
Great, Andrew. So I have one last question for you after this, but I just want to ask people who are viewing this video, if you have any questions, you can put them down in the comment box, and we can take it one by one. So coming back, Andrew, one last question is, what is that one piece of advice you'd give GTM and product marketers, whether they're early stage companies or enterprises, what is that they should absolutely, think about? And what are some mistakes, that they should avoid, and how?
I sound like a broken record when I say this, but it is execution over anything else, and it's relentless focus on the buyer, right? It's buyer. If in doubt, the answer is the buyer. So right? Very, very simple, right? We are not here for us. This is something like I'll often say this, and it gets me in trouble a lot, but that's good, because sometimes I like a little bit of tete-a-tete. But given a choice, buyers would not pay money or buy your solution, right? It's not like they're bored, lonely, looking for friends, and they just have cash burning a hole in their pocket, and they go, you know what? I feel like buying, some, I don't know, what's something. I feel like buying some new glasses today. What sort of glasses are out there, right? No, they have a problem, and then they go and do their research and they buy something to solve a pain that they have. So focusing on the buyer. And this is the big challenge with go-to-market generally, is that we have this top-down approach, and it's siloed around functional teams. It's about sales. It's about marketing. It's about product. It's about customer, like all these different skills that we have, right? And we see this especially in B2B SaaS or just tech, about I've got performance marketing, I've got brand marketing, I've got all these super focused, functional, skill-based roles. I go to something like manufacturing, and I've got go-to-market and I've got marketing, right? We don't have this super, cut-up workforce, right? So keep that in mind. When we say focus on the buyer, it applies to us as well and how we're organized. The big challenges and pitfalls, I see this all the time, copying competitors or similar companies, right? Their messaging, their tactics, their campaigns, like, oh, such and such is going and doing this webinar series, we should do it too. Well, maybe. Have you got any validation for that? Maybe they're wrong. Maybe webinars are not the answer, right? Maybe that's not what your buyers want. Maybe they want to have a drip-fed email campaign. Probably not. But right, like, you need to go and validate that, right? And instead of copying competitors, you really need to focus on, like, what is your unique value proposition and how it aligns with your target buyer's motives, right? Obviously, tailor your messaging and emphasize what sets you apart. The other thing, and this kind of loops back to what we opened with around assuming what worked then or in another company or in another time will work now simply because it worked in that other place. Everyone, like, yes, there are definitely some commonalities and similarities, right? That's always going to be the case. But your product, your market, and now is different to even a year ago for your product and your market, let alone some other product, some other company, right? There are too many things that are different. So yes, use fundamental truisms and common sense and frameworks and strategies, but make sure that what you're doing is tested now. And we often hear about, oh, we're experimental. Okay, cool. Does that mean that your teams can fail? Because if you don't allow failure, of which at least 50% of your experiments should, and you enable and empower teams to, that's okay, then you're not experimental, right? If every hypothesis has to be proven true, A, that never happens, and B, you're not experimental. Right? Allow failure. Other two things that I see, misinterpreting metrics and their relationships. So I do see that go-to-market teams often struggle because they don't fully understand the metrics, what they mean, and how they are interconnected. So, for example, let's say that it's quite common to provide discounts, but if you do that without any regard to cost of goods, right, that can make ARR look great, but may render your gross margin, irrelevant, right? Because your costs are unsustainable. Or similarly, just because ARR is increasing doesn't necessarily mean that you're profitable, right? Maybe you've got a pricing model problem. You're driving, lots of new acquisition, but you've got a low lifetime value. You've got high churn, which obviously then means, but maybe not obvious, you've got a low NRR, right? Like if that's below 100, you've got a problem, right? You're always having to do more. You've got to replace what you've already won, right? So having a clear understanding of unit economics, what the metrics are like CAC, LTV, cost of goods sold, understanding based on how your business and product works and your market, should customer success, if you have it, be sales and from an accounting perspective, is it COGS? Is it product R&D? Is it sales and marketing? Like where does it sit, right? Understanding that stuff is really important from a go-to-market perspective, and product marketers should know this stuff, and we should be encouraged to do that. And then the final thing is, adapting messaging for different segments or geographies, right? We've touched on this a little bit with early stage and enterprise, but even things like SMB versus mid-market versus enterprise or different geos, right? A lot of people think that APAC is, it's APAC, it's all the same. Well, no. There's ASEAN, there's Australia, New Zealand, there's India, there's, did I say ASEAN? There's Greater China, there's Japan, there's South Korea. Yeah. They're all distinct. It's not just that they're different countries and legal, legislative frameworks and language and culture, but if I am in a lot of APAC, you have to transact through the channel, but not everywhere, right? I take Japan, they are so focused on understanding how things work and why, but also they value their relationship with their partner far more than the vendor, right? And a lot of US companies don't get that, right? Or they think that I'm a North American company, I'm in the USA, so we'll go and we'll attack EMEA, and I'll go and do DAC, and I'll do the UK. Oh, I've done the UK, that means I can go and do Australia now, right? Well, Australia and the UK are similar, right? Especially our legal systems and our language, but we're very different, right? And then we've got the continent, right? Obviously the legal system there, continental Europe is a little bit more similar to the US than the UK. But even there, like the European Union, yes, there are a common market, but there's differences in culture. Like it's quite common. I remember one person I worked with, he could speak 7 languages, do business in 5, right? That is not something you see outside of Europe, right? Commonly, right? So understanding all those nuances and those differences and the cultural impacts, right? Like one startup I worked with, US startup, but their mascot was a pig. You can't take that to the Middle East, right? You just can't, right? So they changed their mascot, right? So then you need to think about having, segment-specific personas and messaging, right? Then, like from a software perspective, we think about this in terms of internationalization and localization.
Yeah.
We should consider that as well. That said, sometimes just treating the whole world like America is actually okay, right? Like if you're a US company, right? I transact in USD, I use American English, and I focus on American buyers, and I pick up the rest of the world is good enough for now. And that's viable as well, considering you validated it, right? So it doesn't, just because you're doing different geographies or different segments doesn't mean you have to bifurcate, but you should absolutely go and test it first. So that's kind of the big 4.
Wow. Amazing advice there. The first one resonated so well because I see usually, as marketers, this is the most common advice we are given, being close to our customers and just thinking about them in the first like whenever you do anything, but it's also so well easily neglected. um, and
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just a sad reality, and we definitely need to change that. um, yeah. And the second thing is like, the thing you mentioned about messaging, right? Do not just go and copy out other competitors, right? Especially if you are starting out early and then you're just going for example, there's a new CRM player in the market, and they just go and copy HubSpot, and that'd be like, what is
Yeah, don't
this?
do that. Don't do that. Early
Yeah,
stage cannot copy the approach that big, well-established leaders can do. It
yeah,
absolutely does not work. So I'm a huge advocate for doing research and first-party research and testing. That said, you do need to balance it with sometimes there's things that right? So, big R research, takes 3, 6, 12, 15 months, costs 30 to $150,000. Don't need to do that anymore. We can do small R research. We can augment it with synthetic, but that's always a tertiary approach. But like, we just won't take on new customers if we can't do some form of first party research to validate things, because otherwise you're guessing, right? Yes,
yeah,
you're smart, you know a lot of stuff and you've got a lot of experience, but you're also biased by that experience. And I can guarantee no matter how much you're doing, you are not doing enough to keep up to date with what your customers are thinking and doing. And so that's one of the reasons that, it sets us apart as Deepstar and enables us to really help, right? Is that fanatical focus on the buyer and getting that first party research. All right, it makes a huge difference, but it doesn't need to be a huge exercise. And then that other thing, like as you were just talking about, like we're told all the time to be, customer obsessed and buyer focused. What does that mean, right? I think we're getting a good understanding of that from an external perspective, but internally we're still organized intrinsically with an inward focus, right? Like I said, we've got functional skill-based teams. Now, the short answer is we should get rid of them and we should have go-to-market motion, aligned with the buying stages. Problem with that is the reality is that that'll never happen, right? So it's a bit like, okay, it's David versus Goliath. How do you, and I'm mixing metaphors now, but how do we eat the whale, right? One bite at a time, right? So how can we go and say, all right, within the framework of the organizational structures that we have, how can we actually go and implement a lot of these things? And simple things like when you're having a team meeting, don't go around and ask Bob and Frank and Mary and all the different people about what they're doing based on, all right, I'm going to ask content marketing. Now I'm going to ask performance marketing. Now I'm going to ask product marketing, because everyone's working on lots of things and there's overlap. And so you'll hear a lot of the same information multiple times. You'll get confused and you'll miss things. So when you're running some form of meeting, have it program based. What are we doing for this thing? And then I've got all of the people that are involved in that. But also don't just have a marketing meeting or a sales meeting, right? Have a go-to-market meeting about those different motions, right? And that really needs to be based on fundamentally similar versus different segments, right? So if I'm going after the small and medium market in multiple geographies, but they look, act, and behave the same, that's fine. But if Asia is different to North America, but still in SMB, then I should separate them because they're different motions, different segments, right? But all of the people involved in that, I should have someone from product, I should have someone from marketing, I should have someone from sales, probably someone from customer success. Like, share data, collaborate, right? Think in programs and outputs rather than functional skills and projects. So really quick wins that people adopt.
Yeah, this makes so much sense. Like, especially like as product marketers, we need to be these cross-functional people who go and talk to customer success, sales, other people in the marketing team. And it would become so much easier if we had just like one place where we discuss one particular initiative. Yeah.
It seems so simple and so obvious, and yet, right? It is
Yet.
always a battle to introduce it everywhere. But they love it afterwards, right? And they're like, why did we do this before? Like, I don't know. Like,
Yes, great. Cool. We are just 5 minute shots, but yeah, great talking with you, Andrew. And
Yeah.
this was like an amazing session for me personally, and I hope our viewers also enjoyed this and gained some wonderful insights from this. Uh, so very nice to have you on this LinkedIn Live session with Factors, and we hope to do more with you.
Yeah, look, thanks so much for the invite. I've loved this. It's been a lot of fun. And, look, if anyone wants to reach out, I'm always open to a conversation. Happy to do that. I'll stick around for a while. If people have got questions in the comments, feel free to hit me up. Otherwise, awesome. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Cheers.